Hi guys, welcome to the first ever UEFA Dynasty League podcast. I am your commissioner and host, Erik Myers of VFL Wolfsburg, and with me today I have the owner of Hercules, Travis. Travis, how you doing?
My name's not Travis, but that's fine.
It says Travis on Google Hangouts. I always get confused.
It's good enough. I'm Fred. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So should be a fun league. I don't know anything about soccer. One of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about and blindsiding you here because we didn't discuss it beforehand was the league concept. How you put it together and where you came up with the format.
Okay, yeah. So basically, Matt and I, both the commissioners, are really into soccer. We watch European soccer. And one of our old friends, Lewis, decided to try a English Premier League style league last year, and it never came to fruition. He couldn't get enough people in it, so it kind of just died. And Matt and I talk about soccer all the time, and he was mentioning how like, oh, it'd be so cool if we did it. And I said, all right, well, I hosted one. I'll host one, and I wrote up this rough bylaws draft, and I loved the idea, but eventually it became a little over encumbering, and I stopped. And Matt really pushed me to keep it with it, even though it might be difficult, and really got it together at the end. So it was a team effort. It really came from the love of soccer and fantasy football, and so far it's been great.
Yeah, so I'm in a couple of don't particularly follow soccer at all. I'll watch the World Cup when it's on if I'm out and about and the games are on TV, but I don't make it a habit. So yeah, I just thought the 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 group of people was cool. The concept is interesting, and the idea of joining a startup and fixing all of my teams that I fucked up on last year. Fresh start's always fun.
Yeah, and so I think one thing we could do before we get into it would be to discuss the main differences in this league compared to many of the other dynasty leagues that a lot of us are in. And I think the biggest system that we need to talk about is the draw system. Uh, Based on the research we did, 25% of games end in draws in soccer.
Hmm.
And so what we did was we took research from a few leagues that use the same scoring system with the same amount of teams and averaged it out so that it's about, if you win by 12 points or less, would be 25% of the wins in a league. So that way, we will count those as draws because both teams put up an even effort, even though we're so not used to it in fantasy. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be the biggest. Either it could either make or break your season. Part of it will be luck. Part of it will be your team's built for a high ceiling, or maybe you're just a consistent team that's prone to drawing a lot. I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I don't know that people are necessarily taking that into account as they're drafting right now, but it's absolutely something to be considering while you are in season. You can do some things to affect either your variance or your floor or your ceiling to try and compensate for the fact that you have to win by enough to actually win the game.
Right. And I think just from a competitive standpoint, in a lot of dynasty leagues where teams will sell off assets, um, they they rarely have a chance to win. But now that they only have to lose by 12 or less to
Right,
affect the
right.
standings to a big team, I think it's going to encourage a lot of the higher up teams to be more involved with the lower teams, and it should keep it exciting, even if you're not in a title run at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think the standings aspect as we get later into the season is really going to be a lot less, um, you know, haves and have-nots than you would see in a typical dynasty league.
Yeah. And so, and one big difference that we could talk about before we get into the draft would be the playoffs that kind of run congruent to the regular season, and that is exactly meant to mimic how it happens in soccer, where you're always playing your regular season, and during the week you'll have games for a tournament or two that in Europe means it actually like the domestic cups probably mean a little bit less than the league title. The regular season is the true king because of the longness of it. But it's for football fans here, they may not understand it, but that's why we have the league title being more money.
Cool. Yeah, it should be fun, and this is one of those don't really know the bylaws as well as we would like to until we start getting into it and seeing what happens.
Okay, yeah, and so then that could definitely wait for another day. Just to get into our draft, we've been almost through 8 full rounds in 15 days, which is, I think, the pace that we could have hoped for. I don't think I would. I was happy with the pace that we're at. I think a lot of people are picking quick.
It seems to be. I mean, I don't think it's faster. I don't think it's slow. I think it's just right where a middle of the summer kind of startup draft would go. I don't. I'm not one of those guys who gets on people for not picking. I am one of those guys who has sat on the clock for a little while and tried to make a deal while it's my turn. But haven't let anything sit overnight or anything like that. But I don't think anyone else is particularly holding anyone hostage or holding up the draft in any way. Seems to be just kind of plugging along, and it's going to take as long as it takes.
Yeah, and really, when it comes down to it, everyone that's been busy has kind of pre-drafted so that they haven't been on the clock for 6 to 8 hours of a time. We've really eliminated those, which is a huge help because they eat up, most of the day if you do that. So people that are busy are finding ways to pick. So I really do appreciate that, even if it takes an hour or two. But while we're on draft speed, just want to commend a few of the owners who draft super quick because you're the reason why these drafts are moving real fast. Obviously, Joel is still under a less than a minute total time, which is super impressive. Uh, Looks like that's Joel from West Ham. Barcelona, Cam, who actually hasn't made a trade, has an average pick time of 1 minute, which is super impressive. My buddy John from real life, who's managing Leipzig, is averaging 2 minutes. And Torino, whose name is eluding me at this time, is averaging 6 minutes a pick. So those guys are really picking right away and making their trades early if they are trading. So that's great to see.
Torino is Michael.
Okay. We have a few Michaels, don't we?
Yeah, it's like I said. I think there's the two different types of drafters. The people who are just staying on top of it or just even pre-drafting, and then there's the guys who are trying to milk things or move around and shift up and down as they go.
Right. And so that being said, there's been 48 teams that have been participated in a trade, and the only 3 teams that haven't are in La Liga, Barcelona, as we already mentioned, Real Madrid, who's owned by George, and Atletico Bilbao, whose name is Vic Vinegar in chat, but I'm pretty sure his name is Shane.
Shane, yes.
So
I'm curious to see how the guys that haven't made any moves, their rosters are interesting, to say the least. I see one of them still doesn't have a quarterback. Let's see how the other two look here. I can find there's Madrid. Madrid has a pretty balanced roster, and which you would expect, having his full complement of picks, and where they fell in the draft. And I think Jorge is a pretty good owner most of the time anyway, so he knows what he's doing, or thinks he knows what he's doing. And who was the other? Barcelona. Let me see if I can find Barcelona. Oh, that was Barcelona, wasn't it? Nope. Barcelona's Cameron, and he also has a very balanced roster. He's got a couple quarterbacks, a couple running backs, 3 receivers, and a tight end.
Yeah, I feel like Barcelona's team is very. It could definitely win now if he pushed a little ahead.
He looks like he's built for both the long haul and the future. He's just replace things maybe as they go, as some of these older veterans fall off, but he seems to be either a really good player and a mediocre kind of young player that could be up and coming.
And wow, and Bilbao's roster is all running backs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's one of the ones I was looking at. I was like, oh, that's an interesting. Yeah.
He must be going for one of those late quarterbacks that maybe can get him a year or 2 out of, or plans on trading for one. But
yeah, I mean, there's plenty of time before the beginning of the season. If you were just to go into a draft and take the highest ADP player at every single one of your picks, gives you a lot of flexibility as long as you want to do something with them later.
Right. Okay, so just a couple more draft facts. There's been 120 total trades, and the top leaders in trades are, of course, me and you, who are very active traders with 14 each, and also Mike from Udinese, who might be joining us in a bit, also with 14, who's always a very active trader as well.
Is that how you pronounce that? I've been calling him Udinese.
You know what? I don't know. I have a couple of Italian friends who watch Serie A, so I can ask them and they know for sure.
I'm sure you're closer than I am.
But so we all have 14 trades. We're familiar with these types of leagues, and I think we're all active traders in those types of leagues. So I don't think that's a surprise.
Well, I think it has to do with the types of teams that all 3 of us seem to be putting together here as well. And if you want to do that, you have to be fairly active and sending out lots of offers to try and move back to acquire the future picks that you want.
Right. And speaking of that, I think us 3 and as well as Justin from Hanover 96 are responsible for making 28 owners pay up for 2020 because they traded at least one of their future picks. I just want to commend everyone for paying on time. The only person who was down to the wire was Leverkusen, who was on a flight and actually paid on the last hour while he was on the flight. And because the Wi-Fi was so bad, he double paid. So I thank you. I think it's Erik from Leverkusen who managed to get that just in time, and he's already paid up for 2 years now. So.
Oh, he doesn't get a refund on that?
I asked him if he wanted a refund, and he was like, "You know what? Can you just transfer it to the new league safe when it rolls over?" So he's committed for 3 years. Gotta love that.
I love, yeah, that's outstanding. You want that whenever you're doing a startup. Hopefully, we can get no turnover again, like we had in a couple of the other leagues that have had startups recently.
Yeah. So I think that wraps up all the simple draft facts I had, Fred. So what we had on docket next to talk about was any standouts in the first couple rounds, and I think we identified 3 players that have some variance compared to usual. And I'll start off by mentioning the first one, and it would be Melvin Gordon, who George of Real Madrid picked at 116, and the next pick did not go till 134.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, you think of a 3-copy league, they have a difference of 23 players. That's almost 8 full players off the board between Gordon picks. I don't know that I would have taken him at 116, but it's one of those issues where if you don't feel like you're comfortable trying to make a trade, or you feel like you can't get fair value to trade back, go ahead and take your guy. And consequences be damned if it's 116, if it's 132, you can't can't get any compensation, or you feel like you're not going to get what you want to move back, just take who you wanted there.
Yeah, and I talked to George about this pick, and he said, "Yeah, I feel kind of stupid after the fact, but I still think I wanted him. So as long as he has a good season, I'm really not going to care." And you hit your guys, you're not worried about where the value was. It's easy to be, nitpicky with the values now, but week 3, no one will be even thinking about it because Michael Thomas, who he could have picked, will have a busted ankle, and he'll be the hero of the draft.
Yeah, and if we assume that he wanted to go running back to start, I mean, Gordon was basically the first copy, the fifth running back taken, the fifth different running back taken, and above him, all 4 of the other copies of those 4 guys were gone. So I think there's a big jumble between running back 5 and say even running back like 10 or 12, that it's personal preference. They all have some warts. They all have some things about them that may not put them in the top 4, obviously. So whoever you want there, all the more power to you.
Okay, so it's hard to knock a player like Melvin Gordon. It is one of the better running backs in the league. But moving on to the next running back, and this is as horse racing's fans would say, it's a player coming off a layoff who didn't play at all last year, and that's Le'Veon Bell of the New York Jets.
Yeah, and so the first copy of Le'Veon looks like he went off the board at 201 here, and the final copy went at 235. So 34 picks between the 3 copies of Bell, and this is I talked about the running backs are all in that lumped together after the top group. I think Le'Veon falls into that category and probably closer to the bottom if people are thinking about risk or what have you done for me lately. And I don't know that I would want him there. And for that matter, I think I took someone else somewhere in that range between the 3 Bells. I'm just curious to see. He's a guy that I would want to actually see on the field again before I feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and he's always been a volume guy, fantasy wise. He's a great running back who can catch the ball better than probably any other running back, but he gets so much rushes and so much time on the field that I feel like his elite status is almost pertain. Like he can still have a top 15 season without that volume, and it wouldn't surprise me. But if you want him to be top 3, he really needs the volume that he had in Pittsburgh.
And he totally could get it on that team too. I mean, that's an offense that, along with him having his own personal question marks, everything about that team is up in the air to me. They could be great, or they could completely fall on their faces.
Right, and in a team in a league where you have 16 teams, a second round pick with such a high ceiling like Le'Veon Bell might actually be the smart pick, even if it doesn't pay off, because you have the chance of having 2 first rounders in a startup, pretty much.
Yeah, and if it's somebody who most people, even if they move around, they don't like moving out of a round entirely. So they'll have a first round pick somewhere, they'll have a second round pick somewhere. So having a guy that you can get even somewhat late in the second round that has that kind of upside, that could be difference between winning a league and not. And that goes into the next guy we want to talk about as well.
Exactly. The next running back we want to talk about who fell to the mid-second round was Gurley, who went, it looks like, at 216, 219, and 225. And I think during this startup, it's key to note that Gurley has a report every other day from somebody that knows about his knee very well. And whether it's his friend or his baby mama or his doctor, someone has an opinion on his knee every other day.
Yeah, and it's interesting to point out that these picks were made just about 2 weeks ago now. The 3 picks for Gurley all on the same day, or all within 24 hours of each other, and all 3 copies of Gurley went inside the range that Le'Veon Bell went. So the three Gurleys went from 216 to 225, and Bell went from 2-1 to 235. So people opted not to take Bell to get Gurley here, because I think for the same reason you mentioned before, he has that fantastic upside when he's actually on the field, and he could still be the Todd Gurley we know and love.
Yeah, and again, do you think that Gurley's knee problem, say he gets into a timeshare with whoever, Kelly, Henderson, whoever wins that second running back job, do you think
Brown?
he will still be worth a second round startup if he has like 60% of the work share?
I mean, if you look at somebody like Kamara and the way he shared time with Ingram, I think they have pretty similar game, with the exception that Gurley is more of a power runner, but he's got tremendous receiving ability. So if he's managed the way that Peyton managed the running backs in New Orleans, he could still be an easy mid RB1, and could be for years if his health holds up. I don't know that his fantasy value will creep back that high. Certainly not without people really seeing it on the field and being able to trust him over a longer period of time now. If he gets through this season, plays all 16 games, and is Todd Gurley, what's his startup price next year? It doesn't go back to RB1, but it probably comes back to RB5 or so. I mean, he's right in that conversation, like where you were saying, the top of the next tier.
Right, and the touchdown opportunities are going to be there because he's the running back on a good team.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. And until someone else proves that they are taking that away from him, or the coach, or game scripts, or whatever we see happen on the field changes that, I think you have to assume he's going to be out there for all those prime touches.
Yeah. So those were the three players we highlighted based on where they were drafted that looked alarming. But one player that I wanted to talk about that I didn't list, Fred. And it's funny because I traded for him from you in another league, in our Star Wars league, is Juju Smith-Schuster, who was going around the same range as Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas. But unlike those two players that kind of had their receiver one roles cemented and already tested there, Juju is going to be lifted into this receiver one role that is going to be new to him, with potentially more targets, but also tougher coverage.
So, for a first round pick, Juju actually had a pretty big spread on him as well in this league. First copy went at 125, and the third copy went at 139. And in that time, we also saw Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams copies coming off the board. All three Adams copies went after the first Juju copy, and then all three Michael Thomas copies with the last copy of Juju went together in a clump of 4 picks. Actually, it looks like here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 picks in a row were Adams, Schuster, or Michael Thomas. And that, so it, from what I'm seeing here is everyone, or at least these owners, all had them clustered together in the same group. And then there was a big tier break, and these guys went out and made the pick and got their guy. Because after that, it was, the next tier down.
Right. And now, do you share that sentiment with those how the owners picked in this league? Do you put him with those two?
Do I? Yeah. For right now, I think I have a hard time. Actually, I have a hard time keeping Adams with Schuster and Thomas, only because of his concussion history. If he's healthy, if he's out there, and he kind of plays with a little bit more reckless abandon than those two guys have shown so far, he's certainly going to put up the numbers that they put up, if not better. So yeah, I think you put those three guys together, and I'm going to add in the guy that I took right after these guys went off the board. Actually, is he? No, I ended up trading for him. So I got a copy of Mike Evans, and he went off the board on 2, 3, 4, 5 picks after the last copy of Michael Thomas. So it was the run on the big 3 receivers here, and then I got a copy of Evans. So I think, in terms of fantasy value on the field, who are you going to pick week to week? Among those 4, they're all going to be right together. At least in projections. But what I liked about Evans was that his price was a lot nicer.
Yeah, and Evans has proven that he's kind of QB proof. He did. Ryan Fitzpatrick just throwing bombs; he'll go up and catch it. So it doesn't really matter for him. But I mean, most of these quarterbacks, we haven't seen Michael Thomas or Juju without their top quarterbacks yet. But I'm assuming they'd still be fine.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to have to worry about that for either one of them for a couple more years. I almost think Drew Brees might retire before Ben at this point, because he seems like he's intent to stay out there forever himself.
So before we move on, is there anybody else you want to talk about in these first 2 rounds, player-wise, that has you intrigued?
Yeah, one other guy I wanted to mention was, in our conversation with Bell and Gurley was, I drafted Nick Chubb while copies of both of those guys were still available. And he was, kind of fit the profile of what I was trying to do with my team, where I'm not necessarily trying to get a guy who will win me this season, but he's young and he's probably got that role locked down in Cleveland, assuming that they move on from, or Kareem Hunt moves on from them after this season. So I liked his high upside based on what we saw from him last year, and he's significantly younger than Bell and a little bit younger than Gurley, and I think that he's going to be the kind of player who can move his fantasy value up into that top tier, where those other guys have moved out of that top tier and are now moving down.
Yeah, and one question I have with Chubb, really about the Browns' offense, is what the hell's going to happen to Duke Johnson, who seems to, have the respect of the players, but never the coaches. And now he's finally spoken up, and some people, don't like it, and some people like that he's speaking up teammates wise. And I don't know how that's going to play out. If anything, I think it'll help Chubb that they lose trust in him.
What I'm seeing, reading between the lines there, is that they are angling towards giving more and more work to Chubb for the first half of the season at least, and Johnson is there to get whatever scraps are left over. I mean, he's a tremendous receiver, but I don't think that when he's in the game, there's any threat that they're going to hand him the ball. And that's the thing about Chubb. He doesn't have the receiving chops, but he's not bad at it. So, they can throw him the ball. They can, run a screen pass, and the defense doesn't know just by who's on the field what the play call is going to be.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sure we could always come back to these players. They're still going to be the best players in the NFL before the season starts. That's for sure. But just to conclude this podcast, one thing we wanted to do was talk about our rosters and Matt, the other commissioner's roster for now. If anyone's listening and they want us to go over their roster, go ahead and type in the chat, and we will we'll take a look as well. But just to go over quickly, our teams are kind of similar, as in we kind of traded for more future-oriented talent. Me specifically went all in on this strategy, which I'm kind of new to. It's the second team that I've done it like this, and the first time it worked. And I got what's his name? Aaron in our Game of Thrones league. House Aaron is the one. John, he's the one that is persuaded me on it and showed me it works, and so that's why I went with it. But basically, I have 9 first-round picks. I still got a couple quarterbacks, but those really aren't to win now. That's more just maybe I could get some value because I think they're going to overperform their current value in Cam Newton, Andy Dalton. And then the rest of my team is full of rookies and sophomore players that I think are assets where even if they don't perform amazing, they're still going to hold their value. And if they do perform really well, they're going to skyrocket. So I should be able to, get so much value to build a good team for this league.
So let me ask you this: when you were actually picking players, when you were forced to actually put someone on your roster, were you taking someone that you looked at as someone who you could just trade away later, or were you looking at players that you thought might be on your roster come next year when you're using all these rookie picks as well?
I think it was a mix of both. When I was looking at Cam Newton, I saw him around that pick. I didn't have any good offers in because I kept trading because I had offers I wasn't even getting on the clock. And I finally got on the clock. I'm like, I don't think Cam should be here right now. I think he's due for one of his crazy top 5 QB years, and then I could trade him. So Cam Newton was definitely the trade, and I think along those lines, Dalton was as well because hopefully Dalton has a hot start and I could trade him. I'm not a Dalton believer.
Yeah, well, based on the news that they got today, that the hot start might be a little bit harder because I think they lost one of their offensive linemen that they drafted this year.
Yeah, they lost their first round pick, I think.
But yeah, they're a team that's going to be throwing the ball. They have some new blood on the offensive coordinator, and that they should be at least different than they were before. And anything that's not, was it Marvin Lewis? Yeah, it has to be better, right?
Yeah, and you know what? Last year, Dalton actually was looking. He threw 21 touchdowns in 11 games. He missed the other 5 games, so he was close to having like his second ever 30 passing touchdown season. So he's definitely coming off a better year. He's got the weapons now with AJ Green healthy, with Tyler Boyd. Everybody else is kind of iffy, but Mixon coming into his fruition. So maybe he can pull it together. I don't know. It was a later pick. I won't be that upset if he doesn't.
I see some of the yahoos in chat are listening and would like to be acknowledged.
Okay, so do you want to go over your roster first, or do you want to go over the yahoos in the chat?
Yeah, let me just talk real quick about the guys that I've taken, and I think similar to you, I was just looking for value, looking to move backwards, but at the same time, I was also looking at guys who could be seen as a cornerstone if things work out for them. And I don't think that. I'm hoping they're not particularly risky, but I all in on like Kyler Murray and Nick Chubb. I took a flyer on Tyreek Hill coming back. Guys that could really be the starters on my team for many years, assuming they're on the field and that everything works out for them. But at the same time, I was also able to move around and get value for the picks that I had to be able to drop back and get a guy I wanted and still pick up a first round pick at the same time.
And when you're building a team like we are, where you're not necessarily worried about value at this moment, it's a lot easier to take those risks because a team that is win now and takes Tyreek Hill is going to be way more nervous to sell at a loss.
Right. And even where he had to be taken in this league, it's still a premium-ish pick that is the kind of guy who you need to have as a starter and 8 starter team.
Right. And so I think you've done a good job. You acquired quite a few, right?
I've got 5 first round picks right now.
Yeah, and you definitely have like Mike Evans is a solid player. Like I don't have a solid player. You have Mike Evans, Nick Chubb, and Tyreek Hill. So you're kind of you could easily sell those first for a couple hitters. Given that Tyreek Hill isn't suspended, and you have a competing team as well as a rebuilding team, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think my options are open right now. If I want to move some of the picks, I could pick up a second quarterback, but without that, it's not really a team that's going to make a ton of noise this year. I'm still at, we're in the end of the 8th round, and I've only got 6 players on my roster.
Oh, true.
And I don't have the number of picks that you have coming up. I think you've got, what is it? 2, 3, 4 picks in the next round, and then 3 10th round picks. And I have a 9th round pick and then nothing until the 12th.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm playing with the trying to get value on these guys spiking while you're gonna go like more studs and duds, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there's guys that I'm looking at. I want pieces of, but without really digging into some of the picks that I've acquired or trying to break up the guys that I've got into pieces, I'm not going to get them.
Okay, and just a quick shout out because a couple of guys in chats are going off. Everton is picking at a low pace, like 6 minutes per pick. Sevilla Max is picking 7 minutes per pick. So those guys have said, "Hey, we're picking quick too," and you guys are right. You are responsible for making this draft move along, and we really do appreciate it.
If it's over 5 minutes, I don't even want to talk about it.
I know, but it's still like when they're 38 minutes total, like you've spent like probably quadruple that on one pick.
I have, yes.
So it really does go to show that those guys are really speeding along the draft. Fiorentina is pretty low too. But anyway, moving on to our commissioner Matt, who I'm pretty sure is listening if he hasn't fell asleep. Just to go over his roster quick because he is not going the rebuilding route, so it should be interesting to talk about that roster. I'll start it off by saying he took Mahomes with the second pick equivalent. I think it was pick 5 or pick 6,
Yep.
which was the universal in this draft. Looks like he's got a bunch of receivers, highlighted by Diggs and Cooper, who are both young and productive.
Cooper Kupp comes back, he's going to have quite the stable there.
Right. Yeah. A young guy who showed he could really take care of it last year. And then he did trade away his first. I don't remember who he got, but it might have been that Cup range where he traded up for it, or it might have been for DJ Moore. But as this draft went on, I feel like he should have hammered more on the win now, and he took some assets like Njoku, Debo Samuel. I guess you could say Kareem Hunt, although his is more the suspension problem, not a talent problem. And
right now, on a league that where we only have to start one running back, he does not have a starting running back for half the season, and we're approaching. He's going to be not picking again until the 10th round unless he makes some moves. He's already used his first round pick. He's got a second to deal with, so he can move up. He can turn that 10th into something more useful. But the question is, what's out there for him to get? That's going to be start worthy on a team that has Mahomes and Cooper and Diggs, where he needs not necessarily stud performance from the running back, but he needs a guy who's going to be solid.
Right, and I think what Matt might be going for here is the I'm not going to be a big trader. I'm going to make sure I draft young so that I don't lose value on these guys for the years coming. I don't care if I'm not competing the first year. Not that he can't compete, but he's not going to be an automatic contender. He's going to be we'll see how the guys play. If they play good, I'll start, buying with everything I have left. And if it's not, I'm still going to have a good team for the next few years so I could, pick my spot where I want to attack.
Well, as long as Mahomes is his primary quarterback, he's in the running for being competitive. He's not going to outscore the league by the amount that he did last year. Just by sheer odds. I mean, there's almost no chance that happens again. But at the same time, he should still be quarterback 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is a significant advantage over most of the teams in the league, obviously.
Right. Yeah. So definitely having a quarterback like Mo, and he's young, so that's hopefully, because I want to see him do well. I don't have anything negative to say about him. Hopefully, he has an awesome career, because he could be a generational talent. That's what it looked like after his second year, but what I consider his rookie year.
Yep, and he's got 2 solid quarterbacks for a super flex league. He's doesn't have bye weeks covered, but not everyone can in a 16-team league. So you just hope for the best and play your matchups. Get performance out of one of your bench guys. And he's got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players through the 8th round. So he's got a little bit of extra equity that other teams don't have yet. So he's got he's got all of his starters. He's got 1 bench player technically. He needs a guy who can play running back. And you mentioned Njoku earlier, but he's in that after the top couple of tight ends. Who cares? They're all just hope for a touchdown, right?
Right. So that's true. Yeah. I mean, and he's young, so he's definitely got an upside there, especially if Cleveland pulls it together like, on paper it looks like they should.
Right.
Yes. So I think we got time for one last team, and it looks like Johnny of Bournemouth, who we're good friends with, has requested we take a look at his roster. So I pulled it up.
Let me pull it up here. You can go ahead and I'll.
Sure. So it looks like Johnny. I did pull it up, I swear, and then it's gone already. Here it is. He did sell off all of his picks. He's got a 4th rounder from Mines for his 2020 picks. So he's traded all of his picks, but he got 1 4th rounder back. He has 3 quarterback options. He's got Stafford and Philip Rivers, who they're both middle of the road. Phillips had a much better year last year than Stafford, but guys that are maybe a little past their prime, but are still going to put up points. He's also got Rosen, who appears to be getting a shot in Miami, so he's definitely got quarterback options.
Yeah, and what I'm really impressed with here is his combination of solid studs. You still see it on paper, and he's got Todd Gurley, he's got DeAndre Hopkins, he's got Brandon Cooks, he's got Devonta Freeman. He's got half of his starters set before he even blinks. Those are the guys that he's going to be relying on. Along with 2 of those 3 quarterbacks, you assume it's going to be Philip Rivers and Stafford. You say a little over their prime, but they're both playing like they are in their prime. The only thing holding Stafford back, I think, is the Detroit offense itself.
Right. Yeah, but even with that, he's still, you're not worried about him ever losing his job.
Right.
I mean, Stafford might have been hurt earlier in his career, but I can't remember him missing too much time in the past 5 years.
Yeah, it's curious here, though, looking at his bye weeks, if that had any consideration in his pick of Rosen. Although I guess having Stafford on a bye week the same week as Rosen doesn't help him in any way. And
he doesn't have any other bye weeks, week 5, so he's got enough flex options that he can survive that. He doesn't have to worry about losing that week, at least.
Right, and I don't know if I haven't paid any attention at all to which weeks our doubleheader weeks are, because I'm not constructing my team in that way. But he does have 3 guys, Freeman, Gurley, and Cooks, who are all out on week 9. So that can be a guaranteed loss or 2 if he's not careful.
Right. And I was having this conversation because one of the owners, I'm not going to put him on blast because I don't know if he wants me to say that, reached out to me. He's like, "Oh, man, I didn't see you guys change the bye weeks before the draft started. One of my quarterbacks, or maybe my only quarterback, has a bye week on a doubleheader week."
Mm-hmm.
And and it was I would say it was one of the later weeks, and I just said, listen, by that week, if you were competing for the title, you'd be buying a quarterback regardless if it was a doubleheader week or not. So it's really not going to change your outlook. You're still going to have a good team. And by time week 9, maybe you're looking at like a guy like McCown the past 2 years where you could have got him for a third rounder and he still puts up points. It's not like you can survive not having a quarterback 1 week by trading like little value.
Yeah, and one of the curious things about the way this league is, I'm curious. Things I'm curious to see about the way this league runs in season is how people react to those doubleheader weeks. If you see people scrambling around trying to shift their quarterbacks to someone else, or try to acquire somebody who's just a backup who's in for the week, or that kind of thing, to just try and cover themselves. And if you put up a dud week on one of your in league or in division doubleheader weeks, those can be devastating.
Yeah, and I think that's why we went with a staggered doubleheader week. So like, there's one super early, there's one super late, there's one middle early, one middle late. It's just to keep it in 2 in the middle of the season, so that way there's no way to fully just trade and dump your guys once or maybe twice. You really have to be vigilant with it and stick with your team and have it optimal. And in another way that really mimics soccer with all the injuries and how people need to be fit with your rosters in soccer, it's going to work the same in this dynasty league, which I think works out real well.
Yeah, that's going to be it's going to be fun to watch, and I'm mostly going to be watching from the sidelines to see what happens, and I'll be one of the guys who are trying to sell some quarterbacks or other players to cover bye weeks.
Yeah, I think me and you both, Fred. Okay, well, we went over all the rosters. It doesn't look like anyone else mentioned they wanted their rosters looked at. So, maybe the next time we do a podcast, someone could join on so they could talk about their roster in person. Would love to have anyone on board. We're friendly. We're nice. We don't bite. We drink beer. It's a easy night if you guys want to join.
Yeah, and it's always fun to talk to people to find out what strategy they're using, if any, or they're just out there having fun, winging it, the way some of us do. There's definitely, you can tell that before the draft even started, some of these teams had specific guys targeted in specific areas, and they've moved themselves around to try and get those guys come hell or high water. I tend not to look that far out when I'm setting myself up for a startup draft. I generally just try to look at the draft picks themselves as the assets rather than the players I'm getting with them.
Yeah, I think along with your outlook, I think we've done a good job of keeping tempers low. Even when tempers started to get high, people realized that everyone was kidding, because the startup draft is the most stressful part of a league by far, just because everyone's trying to get their guys and people are upset when they don't get them, or upset when they don't get a trade as good as another team, especially with 488 owners and all the variants we could have. So, thank you for everyone for keeping a level head as you're trying to build the roster to the best of your ability.
Yep, and we'll do these. Try to get through some more rounds of the draft, and talk about some of the trades that teams have made to move themselves around. And in more specific, it's hard to do it when you're just looking at the draft list. But yeah, we have to do some homework and figure out who moved who, and what did they give up to get one of the guys that they got, or how did they end up with the roster that they have halfway through the draft.
Right, and Mike from Udinese is he's really the king of tracking the picks to who picked who and who was worth who and who was worth this. He's really great with that. So maybe when we get him on, he could, it's almost like ciphering a code for us, but he could definitely help us with that. Any more closing thoughts, Fred?
Real quick, no, that's about it for now. I think just we'll get together and do this again. I can get together, maybe later on this week, or do one once a week to catch up, between now and the beginning of the regular season. It's just it's fun to get out, talk some football, talk some bullshit.
Yeah, it was great, and like I love talking to you, Fred, and I'd love to talk to anybody else. But just one last closing thought before we close this up. Mike, who couldn't make it, is going to be running a Marvel vs. DC Dynasty League in July. He told me. He said mid to late July is probably when he's looking for a startup. I know a couple owners have already reached out, like, "Oh, I like this group of owners. Are you guys doing one?" He runs a couple of the leagues that I'm in. He does a great job. So if anyone's interested, you can reach out to him. You can reach out to me, and once he gets those bylaws finished up, we will I'm sure recruit that league up super quick.
Do you know any of the specifics of it? If it's how many teams there's going to be, or what he wants the setup?
No, I pried him for that information today. He goes, "Yeah, later July." That's all I have right now. But he really does have some complex leagues with some really cool ideas. So I'm not worried about it one bit.
Very good.
Okay, so I guess that's all for now. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.